People think if someone wants to kill you, they'll use a gun, a knife, maybe something loud and obvious. But the truth is, the deadliest weapon is silence. It doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't scream. It waits, quietly, inside your coffee cup. I used to trust my wife more than I trusted myself. I used to smile at my brother-in-law while he slowly tried to erase me from the inside out. And my sister-in-law? She didn't just poison me. She designed the poison. My name is Leonard Hayes, and this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about survival, about betrayal by the ones who called themselves family, and how I turned myself into bait to drag them into the light. I used to believe I had full control over my life. Strategy was my currency, precision my habit, and people, well, people were variables I knew how to manage. As the chief strategy officer at one of Chicago's top firms, I dealt with billion-dollar decisions like they were chess openings. I trusted data, not intuition. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't calculate, was that the deadliest betrayal wouldn't come from competitors or rivals. It would come from the same hands that once poured me coffee and smiled at my success. I first noticed the dizziness 3 months ago. Just a mild haze after brunch at my in-laws, Miles and Erica. I dismissed it. Stress, maybe. I'd just flown back from Zurich after 3 days of non-stop meetings. Then it happened again. And again. The fourth time I collapsed in my office after sipping tea Erica had sent over with Julia. That was the moment my doubt began. Not fear. Doubt. A quiet, clinical kind of suspicion that lodged itself into the corners of my mind and refused to leave. Julia, my wife, told me I was paranoid. "You work too much," she said, brushing my forehead with the same hand that once clutched mine at the altar. Maybe it's burnout. But I knew my body. I knew the subtle differences between exhaustion and something foreign, something invasive. And each time it happened, the common denominator was Erica. She had this careful, curated warmth. A chemistry major turned boutique artisan. She brewed custom teas, roasted her own coffee blends, and always insisted on preparing my drinks herself. "For Leonard," she'd say with a wink, "only the best." And I'd smile, outwardly. But inside, a switch flipped. I didn't tell Julia the full extent of my suspicions. How could I? Erica was her younger sister. Brilliant, loyal, her only surviving family after their parents died. Questioning Erica was questioning everything Julia believed about her past. And as much as I loved my wife, I had learned this truth the hard way. Love doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it blinds you to the very thing trying to kill you. So I kept quiet, observed. I started logging everything. Symptoms, dates, what I ate, who made it, how I felt hours later. I installed a discreet camera inside the button of my tailored blazer, tech from a private security contact I'd helped with a startup deal years ago. I even checked myself into a private clinic under an alias and requested full toxicology reports after the last incident. The doctors found traces of an obscure neurotoxin, something not available in any legal pharmaceutical markets. But the dose was so low it barely registered. Microdoses. Smart. Calculated. Intentional. That's when I knew. I wasn't being gaslit by stress. Someone wanted me weak, out of commission, and I had a list of only 2 suspects, Erica and Miles, her husband, a failed attorney with a resentment problem and a penchant for stepping on others to feel tall. But I also knew something else. If I confronted them without evidence, I'd lose. Julia would defend them. HR would assume I was unstable. So I did what I do best. I built a strategy, and I waited for the right opening. It came one Sunday, during one of Erica's infamous family brunches. Julia urged me to go. Said Erica wanted to make amends. Said she'd prepared a new signature blend just for me. You'll love it, babe. She even asked about your favorite roast. I agreed, masking my tension behind a practiced smile. What they didn't know was that I had already planned my move. I arrived early, planted an extra mic in the living room speaker, wore my camera button, and when Erica handed me the custom mug with her usual syrupy grin, I accepted it, held it close, but never drank. When no one was looking, I quietly swapped it with the identical cup Erica had poured for herself and set aside. The rest, I wish I could unsee. Within 5 minutes of sipping, Erica's hand trembled. The spoon clattered to the marble floor. Her lips paled, and before anyone could react, her body collapsed into spasms. Violent, uncontrolled. Miles screamed. Julia froze. I stood perfectly still, heart pounding like war drums, watching as Miles dropped beside her and cried out, "Oh my God, that was Leonard's cup. That was his." And in that one sentence, the mask slipped. That was the moment I knew. I was right, and I had it all on tape. But the worst wasn't Erica writhing on the floor, or Miles fumbling for his phone. The worst was Julia. She didn't look at her sister. She didn't look at me. She looked down and whispered, "I told you this would happen." That's when the real war began. It didn't happen all at once. That's the terrifying part. If someone walked up to me in the street and stabbed me, at least I'd know I was being attacked. But this was slower, smarter, designed to feel like I was unraveling from the inside out. The second time I collapsed, it was in the middle of a quarterly review with our senior partners. I was walking them through projections for the halcyon pitch, and mid-sentence, my vision narrowed into a pinhole. Words vanished. I remember gripping the edge of the conference table like it was the only thing tethering me to the real world. I didn't pass out, not completely, but I left that room barely able to speak, with cold sweat running down my spine and a crushing sense of disorientation. They rushed me to Northwestern. The ER doc ran the usual gauntlet: MRI, ECG, blood panel, and an endless list of questions about stress, diet, sleep, all inconclusive. "You're healthy," they said, like it was some kind of reassurance. But I wasn't. Something was wrong, something invisible, and no one could name it. At home, Julia tried her best. She dimmed the lights, made chamomile tea, rubbed my back. Her kindness was genuine, I think. But there was something distant in her eyes. A fatigue, like she was exhausted from walking on eggshells around me. "You're not eating right," she said. "You push too hard, Leonard. Maybe this is your body's way of demanding rest." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. I missed when I could come home and not question the food on my plate, or the way her voice wavered when she spoke about Erica. I missed our old life, when the biggest problem we had was deciding which coast to retire on. Now, every gesture felt loaded, every word rehearsed. Then came the third episode. I was alone that time, working late, finalizing a deck for the Halcyon pre-board. Erica had dropped off a smoothie that morning. "A little pick-me-up," she said, grinning through the front door before handing it to Julia. I'd barely finished half when my stomach clenched and I had to brace myself against the bathroom wall, trying not to throw up or faint. That was when I started keeping a journal. I logged every bite, every sip, every face I'd seen, and how I felt afterward. I charted patterns. I set reminders to record blood pressure and heart rate throughout the day, and I noticed it. Every major episode happened after contact with Erica. Not just physical proximity. Food, drink, something she touched, something I ingested. And always when Julia was around, gently nudging me to give her sister a chance, or just try this tea, you'll love it. I brought it up to Julia again. this time with as much caution as I could muster. "Have you ever noticed anything strange about Erica's food?" I asked one night, while she was brushing her hair in the bedroom. "Like, I don't know, something off?" She turned sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm not accusing. I'm just asking. You know she's got access to chemicals, right? I'm not suggesting she'd do anything but you are," she said, her voice like frost on glass. "You are suggesting exactly that." There was a silence then, the kind that wedges itself between two people who've shared too much history to walk away, but not enough truth to stay connected. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at me like I'd become someone unrecognizable. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because she told me to, because I couldn't sleep next to someone who refused to entertain the idea that I was in danger, because I couldn't bear the possibility that the danger might include her. Still, I kept going, kept eating, kept smiling, kept showing up to family dinners and pretending the world wasn't shifting under my feet. But each time I took a bite of that homemade quiche or sipped that hand-roasted coffee, I knew I was gambling with my life. And then came the fourth incident. It was supposed to be a celebration, Julia's birthday. Erica had made a cake from scratch. Miles poured wine. Everyone was laughing, even me. I was trying. God knows I was trying. Halfway through the night, I excused myself to the bathroom. I didn't make it. I passed out in the hallway, cracked my shoulder on the banister. When I woke up, Julia was holding my hand. Her eyes were red. She looked like a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. "We have to stop this," she whispered. "Whatever this is, it's destroying you." And for a brief moment, I thought she meant the same thing I did. I thought she saw it. But then she added, "You need to take a leave of absence. Go somewhere. Rest. Maybe talk to someone. Please, Leonard. I can't watch you fall apart like this." She thought I was breaking. Mentally, emotionally. That all my paranoia was just burnout bleeding into delusion. And maybe that was her way of coping, of refusing to believe what her instincts must have already known. But I wasn't crazy. And if no one else would believe me, I'd have to prove it myself. I stopped talking about Erica. I stopped trying to make Julia see what I saw. Every time I brought it up, it felt like stepping into a minefield. One misstep, and the conversation would explode into silence or something colder. I couldn't afford that anymore. Not when I needed clarity. Not when I needed to stay alive. Instead, I observed. In silence. I became someone I barely recognized. A man who hid cameras in his own living room, who logged keystrokes on a shared tablet, who listened back to conversations with the woman he loved, not for intimacy, but for clues. I wasn't proud of it, but pride is a luxury when you think someone close to you might be slowly poisoning your blood. I started small, a miniature voice recorder in my coat pocket, a GPS logger inside my car key, in case my memory started slipping again. I downloaded the access logs to our smart fridge, the smart oven, even the smart speaker in the guest bathroom. Every device Erica loved to show off during her organic brunches. What I was looking for, I wasn't even sure. But patterns started to form. Times when Erica entered the house unannounced. Times when she lingered in the kitchen even after the food was already plated. Even more suspicious, Julia was always there, smiling, talking, distracting me just long enough for Erica to prepare something special. But the worst realization came late one night, when I reviewed a short audio snippet from a smart speaker in our living room. Just static at first, then two voices. Erica's, sharp and amused. Julia's, lower, strained. "He doesn't suspect yet," Erica said. Julia sighed. "He suspects everything. I can't keep defending you if you—" The recording cut out. I must have replayed that line 100 times. I can't keep defending you. It wasn't confirmation. But it was enough. Enough to turn suspicion into strategy. I no longer needed to convince Julia. I needed to survive her silence. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not knowing if the woman I built my future with was scared or complicit. Whether she didn't know or didn't care enough to stop it. So I did what I knew best. I built a timeline, a profile, a counterattack. I mapped out every meal, every visit, every sudden illness. The correlations weren't just strong, they were damning. Erica was always present, always near, and Miles, quiet, smug Miles, was always watching, like he was waiting for me to crumble so he could step in. It clicked one night while I lay awake, replaying every moment Miles had tried to insert himself into Halcyon's pitch preparations. He wasn't just interested, he was desperate. Erica's poison wasn't just personal, it was professional. I was the last wall between him and the one deal that would make his name. I knew then I couldn't wait for another episode. I couldn't risk another drop of whatever they were slipping into my system. I had to end it. Not with confrontation, not with rage, with proof. Ironclad, airtight, camera-ready truth. So I laid a trap. Erica had invited us to brunch that Sunday. Her usual. Avocado toast, chia pudding, some locally sourced pour-over she swore was life-changing. I accepted. But this time, I showed up early. Earlier than they expected. While they were upstairs getting ready, I placed a secondary button cam into the centerpiece vase, synced it with my phone, and checked the audio range. I wired a pressure-sensitive transmitter beneath the mugs on the kitchen counter. One mug labeled L, one E. When Erica poured the drinks, I watched her hesitate for a fraction of a second before choosing mine. "Try this one," she said sweetly. "It's specially brewed for you." I smiled, thanked her, and sipped nothing. Minutes later, I excused myself to the patio, swapped the mugs, and waited. This time, I wasn't scared. I was certain. I don't remember breathing. When I think back to that morning, all the details are vivid. The light filtering through the curtains in streaks of gold. The faint smell of citrus from Erica's overused essential oil diffuser. The clean clink of ceramic mugs as she set them down. But my breath, my heartbeat, gone. It was as if I'd suspended every involuntary function just to focus. I watched her hands closely. The same hands that once handed me gifts on holidays, that texted me, "Happy Deal Day," after every big pitch. She moved with practiced grace, not rushed, not nervous. Too comfortable. That was what struck me. Erica poured 2 mugs from a separate French press. Both looked the same. Same cups, same angle of foam, same sprinkle of cinnamon. But she didn't mix them. No swirl, no stir. Just set one down with a small tag that read L. The other remained unmarked. She smiled at me. "Special brew for the man of the hour." I smiled back, said nothing, and accepted the cup. Julia entered the room moments later, humming something soft under her breath, as if this were any other day. As if this wasn't the final act of a very personal play I didn't audition for. Miles followed with his usual half-smirk, checking his phone more than making conversation. We sat around the table like a happy little family. One of us just happened to be holding a potential murder weapon. I brought the mug to my lips, tilted it, let the liquid touch the edge without tasting it. Then I set it down and excused myself to the patio, murmuring something about a call. Once outside, I pulled the decoy mug from my coat pocket, filled with clean coffee I had brewed myself at home, and made the switch. From the camera in my blazer button, I had a clear view of the table. Erica, chatting, laughing, sipping her water. Miles watching me more than anyone else. Julia. Goddess help me. Julia, reaching across the table to adjust a napkin. Then came the moment. Erica picked up the cup with the L tag. The one she had poured for me. She drank. At first, nothing happened. 10 seconds. 15. She kept speaking. About a new yoga instructor, or was it a farmer's market? Before her words faltered mid-sentence. Her brow furrowed. Her hand began to shake slightly. Then it happened in a flash. The mug fell from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her limbs tensed, then spasmed violently. Her body knocked over her chair, crashing to the ground. Miles screamed. Julia gasped and rushed to her side, hands fluttering uselessly above Erica's twitching form. But it was Miles. Stupid, smug, predictable Miles, who gave me everything I needed. That was Leonard's cup. Oh my God, that was Leonard's. He shouted it as if he'd been programmed to say it. A reflex, a reveal. I stepped back inside, calm. I raised the button cam to face them directly, capturing everything. The spilled coffee, Erica convulsing, Julia frozen, and Miles kneeling beside her with wide, trembling eyes. Miles, I said, my voice even. You should probably stop talking. He jerked his head up. Leonard, what the hell is going on? I tilted my head. You just told us, didn't you? I walked forward, set my phone on the table, hit the record button again, even though everything had been captured already, from 3 angles, with perfect audio. I'm calling an ambulance, I said, crouching beside Erica. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes rolling. I didn't hate her in that moment. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt cold. Like I'd spent too long standing in the storm and forgotten what warmth was supposed to feel like. Julia was pale. She didn't look at me. Not even once. As the paramedics arrived and lifted Erica's convulsing body onto the stretcher, I turned to Julia. She stood behind the kitchen island, hands pressed into the granite like it was holding her up. You knew, I said. You knew something. She swallowed. I didn't think it would go this far. I blinked. That sentence hung in the air like poison. Not that far, I repeated. So some distance was okay. Her voice cracked. I thought it was just her paranoia. She never said it outright. I didn't want to believe. You didn't want to believe. I cut her off. But you knew enough to fear what she might do, and you still let me drink. I never gave you anything, she said quickly. I never touched it. But you stood by, I said, and that was enough. The medics were loading Erica into the back of the ambulance when I handed them the mug, the one with my label that she had used. I wrapped it in a clean cloth and marked it, "Do not discard." Later, I would give the police access to the camera footage, the recordings, the audio logs. I would call my lawyer. I would dig up everything, emails, GPS logs, purchase receipts for chemicals, cross-referenced timestamps. But in that moment, as the sirens wailed down the street and Miles stood beside Julia whispering frantic questions she wasn't answering, I realized something had snapped inside me. Not anger, not vengeance. Detachment. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I was the witness, and I was about to bring down every last one of them. The house felt quieter after they left. Not in the usual Sunday morning way, but in a way that felt evacuated. Like whatever spirit had animated this place, good or evil, had finally been sucked out the front door along with the ambulance. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I didn't follow them to the hospital. Julia asked me once, quietly, just before stepping into the car behind the paramedics, "Aren't you coming?" I shook my head. No. She didn't press. Maybe she knew I wasn't there to save anyone. Not anymore. When the door closed behind her, I stood for a long moment in the foyer, staring at the blood-orange stains on the ceramic tile. The remnants of spilled coffee, mixed with the shattered edge of something far more fragile than porcelain. Our trust, our lives, the story we had written together, and now had to burn page by page. I went home alone. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I downloaded the footage from every device. Blazer cam, centerpiece camera, audio mic under the counter. I timestamped every second, organized every frame. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't spike. It was like I had finally stepped into my natural state. Clarity. By noon, I'd emailed 3 versions of the footage to 3 different drives. One to my personal cloud, one to my lawyer, and one stored on a private external I placed in a locked case in my safe. I copied the voice recordings, exported data logs from our smart devices, and prepared a detailed written account for the authorities. My system was airtight. My evidence? Bulletproof. I didn't contact the police immediately, not because I hesitated, but because I knew better. Timing was everything. If I called too early, they'd treat it as a domestic dispute. If I waited until the toxicology results came in from the hospital, I'd have leverage, confirmation that the compound I found in my system months ago now ran through hers. So I waited. And in that waiting, I watched. Julia didn't come home that night. I checked the security feed. She went back to the hospital. Miles had been allowed in briefly, then escorted out after causing a scene. I imagined him, pacing sterile hallways, trying to spin a story that didn't exist. I imagined Julia, sitting beside Erica's unconscious body, not sure whether to pray for survival or a swift escape. The next morning, I called the hospital under a pseudonym and asked about Erica's condition. Stable, but sedated. Under observation for seizure-related trauma. No visitors permitted for the next 48 hours. Good. I needed space. I spent that day doing something I never thought I would. Preparing a criminal complaint against my own family. The term family now felt inappropriate. They weren't family. They were suspects. Collaborators in a slow-motion assassination. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the lone survivor of a siege no one else had seen. Late that afternoon, Julia texted, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for 5 minutes before replying. Not now. That was all. Not out of cruelty, out of preservation. I was done trying to reach someone who'd chosen to stand on the other side of a burning bridge. That evening, I opened a clean document and began writing the affidavit that would accompany my formal report. I listed each incident, dates, symptoms, observed behaviors, corroborating evidence. I highlighted key phrases from the audio logs. I quoted Miles's slip-up at the brunch, and I added a section at the end, not out of necessity, but for the record, where I detailed Julia's passive complicity. Not to damn her, to document the wound. Somewhere around midnight, I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I realized I hadn't cried. Not once. Not even when Julia stood in the kitchen and looked at me like a stranger. Not even when the woman I once toasted our wedding anniversary with handed me a cup that could have killed me. Was I numb? Or had I known all along that something was rotting beneath the surface? When you live in a house with termites long enough, you stop hearing the chewing. You call it settling. You excuse the cracks in the walls as just aging. But one day, the floor gives out, and you either fall or learn how to stand on air. I chose the latter. The call came just after 9 a.m. "Mr. Hayes? This is Dr. Yasmin Patel from Lakeview Medical. You asked to be notified about Ms. Erica Caldwell's toxicology results." My grip tightened around the phone. "Yes, go ahead. There's something unusual. A rare neurotoxic compound. Synthetic. Not FDA approved, not used in any commercial treatments. Structurally, it resembles tetrodotoxin, but with modified behavior targeting the central nervous system. Small doses wouldn't kill, but over time, it disables. I finished. She paused. Exactly. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. I stared at the ceiling of my study for a long moment, the fan spinning overhead like a slow countdown clock. It was the same compound I'd found in my own system 3 months ago. I still had the lab report, buried beneath layers of encrypted folders. At the time, no one could tell me where it came from. Now, I had my match. That evening, I drove to a private forensics lab I'd worked with before. Quiet, discreet, owned by a chemist who owed me a favor from a case I'd helped settle years ago. I handed him both toxicology reports and a third sample, a trace residue from Erica's coffee mug, which I'd scraped before turning the cup over to the police. He raised an eyebrow. You expecting a confession in chemical form? Something better, I said. A trail. 2 days later, I had it. The compound wasn't just rare. It had a specific synthesis signature. The batch Erica used showed markers identical to those found in her personal lab license application from a grant program she joined 2 years ago. A program Julia helped her apply for. A program that gave her access to restricted compounds for advanced biochemical formulation studies. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. She didn't just poison me. She designed it, built it, tested it, used me as the proof of concept. I added this to the file. Screenshots of grant forms, PDFs from public chemical registries, a comparison chart showing molecular overlaps. The forensics lab even included a sworn statement confirming the match. Next, I reviewed Erica's purchase history. Through access to Julia's shared family Amazon account, I found shipments of glass vials, reagent stabilizers, enzyme preservatives. Nothing illegal, but when viewed together, damning. Then I looked at Miles. He hadn't bought anything, but his phone GPS had logged him at a storage unit 4 times in the past 2 months, always after one of my collapses. A subpoena might be needed to dig deeper, but for now, it was enough. I packaged everything. 3 drives of digital evidence, a printed binder of documents, a written statement summarizing the timeline. I didn't need emotion. I needed impact. Facts, dates, chemistry, voices, video. When I finally called the precinct, I didn't sound like a victim. I sounded like an investigator. Detective Tran speaking. My name is Leonard Hayes. I believe I have proof of attempted murder. 2 suspects, 1 passive accomplice, and everything's on record. It wasn't the footage. It wasn't the toxicology. It wasn't even Erica's scream or Miles's accidental confession. No. What shattered me was a message, or rather, 100 of them. I'd never been the kind of man to pry. Even when Julia left her phone unattended, even when I saw notifications flash across the screen late at night, I never checked. That was the cornerstone of our marriage, respect, or maybe naive trust. But now, armed with evidence, with facts, with the weight of betrayal sitting fully formed in my chest, I gave myself permission. Through a private investigator I'd hired quietly weeks earlier, I accessed Julia's cloud backups, old messages, deleted threads, auto-synced voice memos. She never turned off syncing. Part of me wanted to believe that was subconscious. Part of me knew better. The first thread was dated 3 months back, a few days after my second unexplained collapse. Erica. He's starting to ask questions. You need to keep him focused on work. Julia. I can't keep lying to him. Erica. You're not lying. You're protecting him from his own paranoia. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. There were more. Julia. I found the compound bottle in your bag. You promised. Erica, don't get dramatic. It's trace amounts. Just enough to throw him off. He needs rest, not control. Yes, and Julia, what if he dies? Erica, then maybe he shouldn't have left you so alone all these years. I didn't remember breathing for several minutes. I just kept scrolling. Each message another cut. Julia had known. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the full extent. But she knew Erica was slipping something into my food, my drinks. She suspected it for weeks, maybe months. And she said nothing. No, worse, she justified it. I just wanted peace, one message read. You don't understand what it's like being in the middle. You don't see how much she spirals. If I push too hard, she might hurt herself. Those words, so quiet, so human, somehow hurt more than the poison ever did. She hadn't chosen Erica over me. She'd chosen fear over action, silence over confrontation. That was the shape of her betrayal. Not sharp, not loud, but slow, soft, and paralyzing. There was one voice memo, no more than 25 seconds long. Julia's voice, fragile, tearful. I know what you're doing is wrong, but I don't know how to stop you. I hate watching him fall apart. I hate watching us fall apart. But I can't lose you too. You're all I have left. I sat there in my study, that message playing on loop, feeling something deeper than rage. Grief for the woman I thought I married, for the loyalty I believed was mutual, for the version of me that still thought love, by itself, was armor. I closed the laptop. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. I didn't want revenge. Not anymore. I wanted reckoning. Julia wasn't innocent, but she also wasn't the architect. She was the mirror of every person who sees harm, feels it, and convinces themselves that inaction is the safest choice. But silence can kill. And now, she'd have to live with the noise of what she refused to stop. I met with the detective 2 days later. He didn't flinch when I handed him the folder. He just opened it, page by page, scanning the evidence like a man used to seeing the worst of people, but still surprised when it came from someone's family. Video clips, audio logs, forensic reports, toxicology comparisons, purchase records, the mug, the match, the motive. He looked up halfway through. This is airtight. I don't want retribution, I said flatly. I want accountability. The following day, both Erica and Miles were officially named in the criminal complaint. Erica was still recovering in the hospital, but under police guard. Miles had no such protection. He was arrested in his office parking lot. They seized his phone, laptop, and vehicle. The search of Erica's home lab, technically funded under Julia's name through a shared grant, uncovered controlled substances, chemical compounds matching the ones used against me, and notes outlining dosages by body weight and metabolism. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was premeditated. Julia didn't deny anything when served with a subpoena. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just nodded when the officer explained the terms of her required cooperation. I watched from the far end of the hallway. She caught my gaze but said nothing. That silence was louder than any scream. My lawyer told me the case was unusual but strong. You've built something prosecutors usually dream of, he said. You didn't just survive. You documented everything. They'll have no defense but denial, and that won't hold up. For the first time in months, I slept a full night. Not peacefully, but uninterrupted. Not because it was over, but because I'd finally taken back the narrative. She asked to meet in the garden behind the courthouse, a place we used to walk through during better times. Early spring, when the tulips bloomed and we could pretend that things were simple. I arrived first. I always did. Julia showed up 10 minutes later, dressed in soft gray, her face paler than I remembered. There were no guards, no press, no lawyers, just the two of us, and a silence thicker than any accusation. She didn't sit. She just stood a few feet away, clutching the sleeves of her coat like they were holding her together. "I know you hate me," she said quietly. "I don't," I replied. "That would require feeling something." She winced, but didn't argue. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Leonard." "No," I said. "That was Erica's job." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. I didn't know how to stop her. I kept thinking it would end on its own, that she'd come to her senses, that you'd be okay. "You wanted to believe in the version of her that only existed in your memories," I said. "But people change. You saw her change, and you did nothing." Julia's voice cracked. "I was scared. She's all I had left. After our parents, after the miscarriages, I just couldn't lose her too." "You didn't just lose her," I said. "You lost me. You let me rot from the inside out, and you called it love." We stood in silence, birds chirping somewhere far away. "I listened to the voice memo," I added. She closed her eyes. "Then you know I didn't want this." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't want anything enough. Not enough to act. Not enough to stop it." She finally sat, her hands trembling in her lap. "Are you going to press charges against me too?" I looked at her long and hard. The woman I once trusted with my life now sat before me like a ghost of her own choices. "That's not my call," I said. "But whether you face prison or not, you'll carry this. Every day." Julia looked up, tears falling freely now. "Do you ever think we could have been different?" I paused. "No. I think this is exactly who we've always been. It just took poison to show it." I turned, walked away. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. The date was set. Monday, 9:00 a.m. Criminal court, downtown. My lawyer said we were ready. The evidence chain was intact. The forensic testimony had been pre-reviewed. Witness subpoenas had been filed. I should have felt something. Relief, anxiety, dread. Instead, I felt hollow. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending. The press caught wind of it a few days earlier. Not the tabloids, not the twist-of-the-week YouTubers, but real journalists. A quiet headline in a national law journal. Chicago executive alleges coordinated poisoning by family members. Full trial set. The comments were what you'd expect. Curiosity, doubt, sympathy, skepticism. Everyone had an opinion. I didn't respond to any of it. Reporters reached out. Cameras loitered near my office building. I ignored them. I didn't want to be the face of betrayal. I wanted to walk out of this with no one knowing my name. My firm quietly placed me on indefinite leave. HR phrased it as reputational distance during legal proceedings. I understood. No hard feelings. When the system goes after your own blood, it stains everything around you, even your silence. What surprised me were the private emails. A former analyst I hadn't spoken to in years wrote, "Saw the story. I'm not shocked. You always carried yourself like someone who saw deeper than the rest of us." A junior associate sent, "You're calm through all this. It taught me more than any leadership seminar." They weren't many, but they mattered. One message, though, stood out. From a name I didn't recognize. A woman from St. Louis. She wrote, "My brother poisoned our father slowly over 6 months. No one believed me until it was too late. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for surviving." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my story. It was bigger. There are people walking through life right now, doubting their instincts, excusing the unease in their stomach after every family dinner, wondering if they're imagining it, being told to stop overthinking. Maybe this case wouldn't just convict 2 people. Maybe it would validate the ones who whisper, "Something isn't right," in the dark. On the morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse for a long moment before going in. No entourage, no statement. Just me, in a gray suit, holding the folder that contained everything. Not because I needed the papers, but because I wanted to carry the weight of the truth with my own hands. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. White walls, stiff suits, fluorescent lights that stripped every person of their charm. No one here was a sister, a husband, a victim, a wife. We were names on a docket, evidence numbers, charges, witnesses, and I was just another man taking a stand to tell the truth. Erica sat across from me, thinner now, her once sharp eyes dulled by weeks of medication and guarded silence. Miles looked worse. Sweat collected under his collar. He avoided eye contact with me from the moment I entered the room. Julia was there too, off to the side, not on trial, but present as a cooperating witness. She sat with her hands clasped tightly, her lips pale and unmoving, as if still praying this wasn't real. The prosecution laid out the timeline. My unexplained collapses, the chemical found in Erica's bloodstream matching the one previously found in mine. The recordings, the emails, the receipts, the synthesis data, the lab equipment, and, of course, the footage. Erica drinking the cup meant for me and seizing on the floor, while Miles shouted what would become the linchpin of the entire case. That was Leonard's cup. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it simple. I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I told the court exactly what happened, how I noticed the symptoms, how no one believed me, how I turned my body into a crime scene for the sake of proof. I told them what it felt like to be gaslit by the people closest to me, to watch my wife retreat into herself while my body failed under her silence. I spoke about betrayal, not as something cinematic, but as a quiet death that unfolds in teaspoons. The defense tried to spin it. Erica had a history of anxiety. The compound was experimental, not malicious. Miles had no knowledge of its effects. Julia was caught in the middle. But the facts didn't bend. The lab analysis didn't lie. The audio clips didn't stutter. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. The verdict came faster than I expected. Guilty. Erica and Miles were each sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The charges included attempted murder, use of illegal chemical agents, and conspiracy. Julia, cooperating witness, received a formal warning, 3 years of supervised probation, and mandatory psychological counseling. She didn't cry when the judgment was read. I didn't either. After the trial, I walked out alone. Reporters shouted questions. I kept walking. I didn't want to explain it anymore. I'd already said everything that mattered under oath. Weeks passed. Life didn't resume. It reinvented itself. I resigned from my position at the firm, quietly sold my shares, bought a small cabin on the outskirts of Michigan, and began volunteering with a nonprofit that helped victims of coercive control and psychological abuse. I spoke at universities, not as a strategist, but as someone who understood the fine print of trust. One night, months later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note. You were the first person who didn't apologize for surviving. No name, just a signature I didn't recognize. But it stayed with me. I no longer hated them. Not Erica, not Miles, not even Julia. Hatred was too heavy to carry for someone who'd already spent so long dragging the weight of silence. I let it go. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom. Sometimes, I still make coffee in the mornings and pause before the first sip. Habit, I guess. The body remembers long after the mind has forgiven. But now, it's just coffee. No poison. No cameras. Just steam rising in a quiet room. And a man who finally knows how to drink without fear. Because the truth, once spoken, doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard.